in the realm of politics, the idea of opposites attract can still apply. Congresswomen Paulina Luna and Alexandria Occasio-Cortez, a very conservative Republican and a very left-leaning Democrat, have come together on new legislation.
On Friday, they introduced a bill that would cap credit card interest rates at 10%.
Now, Luna wrote on X, "For too long, credit card companies have abused working-class Americans with absurd interest rates, trapping them in an almost insurmountable amount of debt. We need a fair solution. That means getting rid of the status quo and putting a reasonable cap on interest rates."
Occasio-Cortez also commented on the legislation, writing in a press release, "Credit cards with high interest rates regularly trap working people in endless cycles of debt. At a time when families are struggling to make ends meet, we cannot allow big banks to shake down our communities for profit." During his campaign, President Trump pledged to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. We're making that pledge more than a talking point by introducing legislation to protect working people from remaining trapped under mountains of debt.
Right now, the average credit card interest rate is a little under 29%, according to Forbes. Now, according to the Fed, the lowest credit card interest rate ever was about 11.88% during the 2008 recession.
And last month, Senators Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders, another very conservative Republican and very left-wing, not even officially a Democrat, independent, introduced a very similar bill.
And President Trump seems to be on board with the idea. During a rally in September, he told a crowd, "While working Americans catch up, we're going to put a temporary cap on credit card interest rates. We're going to cap it at around 10%. We can't let them make 25 and 30%. Some aren't too thrilled with this, however. Northwestern University economist C. Carabo Jackson warned on X, "Such a policy, though well-meaning, will almost certainly lead to credit rationing, whereby low-income borrowers get no credit at all. A cap at 30% could be beneficial, but 10 is way too low. To be clear, this is not just a hot take. Research does indicate this." And Eddie Scarry of The Federalist suggested it would make more sense to make credit interest rates of a certain percentage only legally obtainable by individuals at or above a certain credit score. So this, I know what this is going to be. This is going to be a case of you agreeing with the right and left coming together and me being no fun and being against this.
Exactly. You're going to be the staunch defender of credit card companies and their huge profits, Robby.
Well, I mean, again, it's just reality because, as that economist said, what's going to happen is they're just not going to offer credit cards at that level. If you, like, you can't get around economic reality. If the government says you're not allowed to make this kind of transaction, again, which is violating human consent, no one is forcing people to take a credit card out at that interest rate. Companies saying, here's a credit card and here's what the interest rate is going to be. Do you accept? And you're saying, yes, I accept. So, brother, that's on you. I don't know what the government should have to do with this. It's a consent. It's I consent, and the government says, but I don't. Give me 30 more seconds and you can chime in. So I think what's going to happen is, as that economist says, they're just not going to offer credit cards to high-risk people at all. I mean, the reason the interest rate is higher is for people who are a riskier investment or riskier borrower. That's for the company to still have economic incentive to do it. They make the interest rate that. If you take away that protection on the credit card company side, they're just not going to offer it to people whose credit scores are shaky, and that will be bad for working people.
So I think what is bad for working people is extortionate rates of loans of whatever kind, whether that's credit cards, payday loans, or anything else. And this argument that the credit card companies are going to be so put upon by these kind of regulations seems to me to fly in the face of what kind of profits they generate. We noted in the introduction about Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley coming together, and Sanders, being Sanders, of course, helpfully provided some information on that. In the past 5 years, Visa's profits were $67.5 billion. MasterCard's $44 billion, American Express $33 billion. So it's not as if these companies are like struggling in some way that their entire being would be called into question if they lowered the interest rate. Now you can, I agree, have an argument about what the interest rate should be. I'm also kind of struck by the shock of me agreeing with Eddie Scarry in something, because why do we have this idea that credit has to be extended to everyone, and therefore because we take that as the starting point, it's okay to have extortionate rates? There are people who don't have the means to avail of credit and are going to get themselves deeper into the hole when they're paying 27 or 30 or 40%. And it is fine to say, well, you don't qualify.
But no one makes you do that. I mean, again, you say extortionate, but it's just an arrangement between two private parties that I'm going to loan you this money and you're going to pay it back at this rate, and that's just should not be the government's business. That's just a transaction. Just as if I say I'm going to pay the neighbor kid to mow my lawn, and I'm willing to give them $20, and they say okay, and they're willing to do that, and the government says no, you got to give them $30. Then I say, okay, never mind, I'll just do it myself. But like, that's what happens.
The problem is that it is a way of taking advantage of people who, for whatever reason, feel that they require liquidity that they don't possess. And then they are left with paying an average of 27% when the actual Fed rate of interest is about 4.5%. So that, I mean, the basic business model of the credit card industry is we will push credit to people and we will actually hope that a significant number of them can't afford to repay that on time because we make money through the interest and the fees.
Yes.
And so that is, of its very nature, something that is at the least susceptible to manipulative behavior or digging people deeper and deeper into debt. And it is a perfectly acceptable practice of the government to say we have to cap that at a certain level because at a certain point it just becomes willfully taking advantage of people.
Okay, but what if I'm a person who has fallen on economic hard times, but I can get myself back on my feet, but I need this credit card in a form of a loan, essentially thing, to get to that place, and I'm willing to pay an exorbitantly high fee because I need it right now, and I'm going to get myself back on my feet when I do that, and I'm willing, I know, yeah, I got to pay whatever, 20, 30%, I know that, I'm willing to do that, and you're the lender, you're willing to do it. Again, it just comes down to a fundamental philosophical difference, I guess we have. I think that should be a legal transaction between those two people, and you're saying the government should step in and say, no, you're being manipulated, you should not have access to this.
Yeah, I'm saying that at a certain point it becomes excessive and that the government has a valid interest in curbing excessively extortionate behavior on the part of financial institutions. If someone was in the scenario that you're talking about, they could go to a bank that charges significantly lower interest rates and try to provide liquidity to themselves in that fashion.
Well,
the problem, I mean, there is...
Aren't those... I'm no expert on this in general, but isn't it notoriously difficult to get loans for people with bad credit or bad financial circumstances to get these kinds of arrangements from banks for precisely that reason?
But this goes to actually my broader sort of cultural point, which, to be fair, isn't really ideological, which is that we have got so accustomed in this country in particular to people racking up enormous amounts of debt. And not to sound completely old school here, but like people should live more frugally and not carry on average vast sums of debt. And the reason that is difficult for so many people is because there are so many people in very, very low income jobs. And the disparity between a very small, for example, federal minimum wage and living expenses is so great that it pitches people into these kind of debt traps.
Well, I agree that you should not get yourself into heavy amounts of debt. I mean, I warn this, we probably have very different attitudes about how to solve the student loan debt crisis, but I advise people that do not go significantly into the debt for an elite college education. If you're wealthy and you're spending your parents' money and you really want to do that, fine, but do not think that going $50 or $100 or more $1,000 into debt for a degree from a fancy college is going to necessarily be worth it. Obviously, depends what you study. If you take out that money to be a doctor or maybe a lawyer, although even a lot of lawyers can't get jobs, really think through it. Right. Just to get a very fancy, expensive liberal arts degree, you are destroying yourself. You can get the same quality. similar-ish quality education affordably from a much cheaper school, and that will be worth it in the vast majority of cases. And that is my general advice to people.
You see, we have a moment of agreement after all.
All right, coming up, is Elon Musk's involvement in politics hurting his company, leading to violence and destruction against Tesla? We'll talk. Stay with us.